He eventually moved on to go back to his alma mater, Notre Dame, where he is now the athletic director. And Jack had been asked in an alumni publication to talk about his days at Notre Dame and what he thought was the most important class he took in his undergraduate days and his most challenging class. And I use this story because it exemplifies what we want our students to be. Let's just say his best class was the one in philosophy. I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, I'm not capable of talking about that. The one he talked about the most, though, was the one of his freshman year seminar. And the story asked, why was this your most challenging class? And he said, because the professor stopped grading after the first grammatical error. Now, I'm teaching a class where I'm expecting students to deliver me 5 papers, quality papers. I have a student who was struggling for other reasons. I wasn't quite sure what they were, but I knew she was going on campus to get support from other agencies on campus to help her out. And we had agreed, because she was unable to finish all of her work, that she could finish it in the summer semester when she would again be taking my business decision class, which is basically a business simulation, during an intense summer session. I said, wow, here she's going to finish up the papers she couldn't complete, and she's going to finish up my class in the summertime. Anyway, comes to summer, 6 weeks, very intense. We're going through the semester. Her team is doing fabulous. In fact, her team came in the top 10% internationally on how well they did. I said, wow. Then she came to me about mid-semester. She's professor. I think I'm ready. I'm going to start handing in the missing papers to make up for my incomplete. She turned in the 4 papers she was missing. I sat down and went through those 4 papers. She had finished them all, and I was teaching another class that was using the same cases at the same time. I finished reading the 4 papers. I sat down with her. I said, Sue, I'll call her. I went through all of your papers. I found 1 grammatical error on the last paragraph of the last page. She said, wow. Went back, came back an hour later, and fixed the 1 error. Now, she gave me real hope, because the rest of the classes that I was teaching that semester weren't doing nearly as well. She then shared with me what her struggle was. And so she got campus help. She actually started at one of the other more prominent Indiana universities and dropped out because she wasn't getting the help she needed to succeed. She has since graduated, is now working for one of the top 4 accounting firms in Indianapolis. Now, what impact did we have on that student? Right? We could have said no. We didn't have to help her through it. But it's an individual student at a time. They all have their own stories. They all have their own struggles. They all need their own help across campus. And it's up to us to provide that. 1 student, 1 instance at a time. And that's what I want to talk about here with the numbers. Okay? Because the numbers simply reflect what you do. What each and every one of you and your colleagues do in the classroom to help our students succeed. Where I want to start is when I came to IUPUI 10 years ago, I took over a class, a large capstone, a large gateway class, and the first semester I took it over, I was told about DFWs. At that time, our graduation rate was 20%. DFW rate for the class I took over was 44%. It now sits at about 18%. I don't teach it any longer. I got it down close to 20, and my colleague has got it below 20. Okay? It makes a difference. So I want to show you the difference you make. I went back to the IU archives trying to find data. And I did find it. If I want to show you some important data, things that really have not changed over time. This goes back to persistence to the 2nd year, and this is the first year that I can find where we actually measured graduation rates, which was fiscal 92. Overall persistence for that year was 55.9%. I think that's the lowest we've ever had, if you look at the trend. But what hasn't changed? While that persistence rate has gone up, the retention rate has gone up. What's interesting is I find that the first-time beginners that we always talk about, because that's the way the graduation rate is set up, our transfer students typically do as well, or very close to it, as our first-time beginners. That's good news. That suggests that we're bringing in good people, whether they're transferred or whether they're first-time beginners. What we do notice, though, as we move down here, is that full-time students tend to do quite a bit better than part-time students. That's a commitment issue, and we over time have reduced the number of part-time students, which has helped us to some extent. But that number has stayed, that differential has stayed over time. You'll see that in a minute. The other thing is, students have to succeed in the first semester or they're unlikely to continue on. That's why we're so important. How do we get students succeeding from the very beginning? If they get below a 2.0 in that first semester, it's very hard to see them progress beyond that. And so you're getting onto the student early, helping that student succeed at the beginning is so important, otherwise they're going to become a casualty to the system. Those have not changed. I am going to talk about some things that have changed though. Let's go back to some other data. As we began this journey back, the retention rate in '92, 6-year retention rate, was 55.9%. That resulted in a graduation rate of 19.6%. How many of you would come or send your children to an institution that had a graduation rate of 19.6%? Anybody? Okay. Turns out that in that year we also had 2,100 bachelor degrees and 579 associate degrees. Moving forward, we measure ourselves against 13 other universities. They're listed here. This happens to be the Washington Monthly Classification. It was just published. The date is actually a year old, so it's not going to be quite today's data. But it shows how are we doing against our comparable institutions. And what I picked out here is the actual graduation rate. They calculate, as does U.S. News and World Report, a predicted graduation rate, which suggests, based on your incoming class and other information, this is what you should be graduating. And I've just shown you the difference. The green is good, the bad is red, the red is bad. What does this tell you? Where's IUPUI on that list? Today. We are second from the bottom. Thank God for Wayne State. Yeah. And this showed 33%, which was our graduation rate a year ago. We are currently at 38%. We have doubled the graduation rate. I think we can feel very, very good about accomplishing that. But this suggests a couple of things to me. One is, wouldn't we like to get off the bottom? And we will, but we got to get in the 40s. We have a little ways to go yet. Number two is that as you move up, the predicted rate seems to get better. Look at those two at the top, University of Buffalo and Temple. It seems as though they're actually doing better than their incoming graduation rate. That suggests to me hope that as we get better, as we do a better job, as we rise, so does the reputation and everything else at an exemplary rate. So my hope is as we get better, the differentials will get smaller and we'll start to move up further and further and further. So at the moment, we've surpassed Wayne State, but we got a ways to go to get into the 40s and get up to University of Colorado and University of New Mexico. So where are we at? Well, not where are we at. Well, where are we at today in terms of the latest college report? This just came out earlier this week, and this is kind of interesting because U.S. News and World Report has ranked us in the up and coming for how long? Forever. We're now up to number 5. Aren't you sick of being up and coming? Wouldn't you like to arrive? Yeah, I would too. The other interesting thing about this is they're changing their methodology. Their weights are going much more heavily to outcomes, not input. So the better we do on outcomes like graduations, the better we're going to be doing on these as well. So it's time we move up and get past the up-and-comers and into the we're there, we've arrived sort of category. One good news, decent news for me was when I started to look at this last year, I actually graphed all of those universities and all of their graduation rates versus retention, because I was interested in how does retention in the first year affect the 6-year graduation rate. And there's your kind of linear line for that. You can see IUP was kind of sitting on the bottom, but you see that big little circle there, the big star. I predicted that that would happen based upon the retention rates, and guess what? It happened, so I can sell myself as a good forecaster. Okay, so we moved up quite nicely in terms of this data. The latest data is not yet out on the others. I'll bring this up to date to see how we compare most recently. So we're still at the 2005 data here, except for that one. So for the 06 cohort, or the 12 graduation rate, IUPUI is sitting right at about 38%, double of where we started. Here's where we are today. Our DFW retention rate last year was 64.6%. That resulted in the 38.6% graduations. And it resulted in 3,670 bachelor degrees, and we see the associate degrees getting smaller as we move along here. So we've doubled the graduation rate. We haven't quite doubled the number of graduations. Okay, so things are moving well, but I have a firm conviction here that as I follow the data, that retention, particularly in the first year and the first semester, really is what leads to graduations. There are other things along the way here, but that's the most important. So if we take a look at where we're going, if I take our current retention rates and I plot those up, I can also predict what I think the graduation rates will be. That's going to move us up. We're sort of clustering right around 70–71% here. And if that's true, and this is the latest one that I've got, if that's true, this would suggest to us that we ought to be able to get above that 40% 6-year graduation rate within the next couple of years. The problem is perhaps we're at a plateau. How do we move further along? And I know that the Council on Retention and Graduation kind of threw some goals out last year that said they'd like to be at a roughly a 50% graduation rate and an 80% retention rate. The question is how long will it take and what do we have to do to get there? And it's all of us who are going to have to do something to get it there. I don't have the answer yet, but that's kind of what we're sort of aiming for. So the good news is we've made tremendous progress. The good news is we have a lot more progress to make. The worst place to be when I tell my business students is don't ever go into a job where everything is going absolutely perfect. Because the best thing you can do is not screw it up, right? We have plenty of opportunity here, and we are making progress with all the work that we have done, and that's the key message. DFWs tie very, very closely to retention. This is the retention rates. The fall 12 retention rates are not in yet. I know I've talked to several people who are quite nervous about these. I tried to get them for Bloomington, but they have not done them yet because Bloomington is a week behind us, so they apparently are on Bloomington's schedule, not ours. DFWs would suggest they ought to improve. First year retention last year would suggest they might go down a little bit, so I don't quite know. Best, I'm going to guess it's probably going to stay fairly level. You see the three lines at the top. The heavy line is the overall DFW, the overall retention rate, which is the one I use. I've also shown you the retention rate for the transfers and for the first-time beginners. And the reason I show that to you is two separate numbers just to show you how close they still are. The real issue tends to be the Part-time students, we've continually reduced the number of part-time students falling. So we've reduced we've improved the retention rate 16 percentage points since 1999. So that suggests we can do it if we choose to. This is where students fall out. The bottom is the number of students we've retained. The top are the number of students that we have not retained in each of the semesters. And the top number is the number of fall entering students that we have at IUPUI. You can see that at the beginning of this chart, 98, the largest class we had beginning was back in F98, where it was 49-35. It's since gone down from that. Good news was we had great results in fiscal 11, fall 11, where we actually ended up picking up 300 more students and we retained them all, which helped to get our retention rates up. I don't know about the last year's numbers yet. I do know that we have increased about 300 more students. And in looking at the latest registrar data, it would appear if the number of transfers stay the same, we'll be increasing another 300 to 400 students. So the key thing is do we retain all those students that we bring in? Because if we do, we should see further improvements. So hopefully in the next few weeks we'll get the data and we can fill in some more of the blanks that we don't have here yet. One other thing is I looked at the incoming students, the beginning students. The quality appears to also be improving. I think we've had the highest SAT and ACT rate this year in incoming students. This is how DFWs tie against the retention. You've seen this before. Retention rate last year improved to 21.2% overall for the fall. And so I would expect or hope that the retention rate would actually improve. And if we look at the fall plus spring grades, which is kind of what I look at, have a shorter data, but the R-squared is about the same. Overall, we improved to 22%. So my hope is that we're going to see an improvement in retention as well. One other point I'd like to make: those little black lines at the top, that delta of 5.8 or delta of 7.4%. That's what we can't explain with this. And as John Kramer and I did a lot of work in this area, we tend to feel those are probably those students who, for whatever reason, just drop out and at some point hopefully could come back. They can't be explained by the data. They're perhaps like my example, the student that I managed to get through the class. She could have dropped out. We could have dropped her out. But the fact is she could succeed very nicely if we were willing to help her. And we do have a number of students who fall into those categories. So our goal here needs to be, when we have students who have a life experience that's affecting them, our goal should be to do what? Help them over the life experience and get back in the classroom as quickly as possible. I had an MBA student the other night came talk to me and said, hey, I might have to drop the program. All of a sudden his daughter is in the hospital. His job becomes more difficult. They just laid off a number of employees, so he's got to take on more work. He says, what should I do? I say, what are your priorities? If your priorities are your family and keeping an income going in your job, maybe you ought to delay the MBA for another semester or two until that's set. And so we have students who are in that same category. We have to help those students figure out the right thing to do. So we've expanded the DFW reporting to fall and spring. We're also going to add summer to that. The summer data doesn't change this a lot, just haven't had a chance to formalize it. So we have given in your packet, each of you, DFW reports going all the way back for fall and spring to AY07 through AY13. So you have all the data you want. And what I'm doing is I'm giving you all of the DFWs, not just the first-time beginners. Because we don't see just first-time beginners in our class. We see everybody in our class. And so this is a good tool for you to use with those who didn't come to the session today. As to how are you doing. The goal here is not to spank anybody. The goal here is simply to let you know how things are going. Sometimes there are good reasons why we have changes in DFWs. Okay? Sometimes there are very good reasons why that happens. And what we have to do is say, okay, this is what happens, how do we fix it? What do we do differently? Or do we need some help? And so it's important that we say, how do we keep the trend going in a positive direction? So you have all the data on the charts. Now I'm going to summarize this for you as I have in the past. This is the 7-year, 07 to 13 change. The blue line is where we started in 07, and the number of DFWs where they would fit along with each of the departments or class, if there's only one class in that department, along the top. And that shows you how many DFWs there were. And the red line shows you the improvement through fall and spring of 13. And where you see yellow is where we have no improvement. Now that could be a semester issue, I don't know. I'm not judging. Again, it's just information. But I would certainly be talking to those departments to say, what help do you need? What's happening? What's going on? It could be a lot of things that are affecting what's going on here. And we can see some tremendous improvements. I mean, look at math, psychology, across the board. Tremendous improvements in DFWs, which are helping towards the retention. I also updated the cost of DFWs to our students. The new tuition rate at $225 an hour now ends up at $775 for a 3-credit-hour course. If we go back over 7 years, this is the amount of money students have spent on classes that have not yielded them anything in terms of academic. $60 million of effort that's not resulted in a meaningful credential that they can use. That is not a trivial number. It is not a trivial number. This is the improvement year over year. So what I've done on this chart is the green shows you last year, the red shows you this year, and the DFWs are the number of DFWs for each of those classes in the most current year. So you can now see where the highest numbers are and where the percentages are, and who's improved or who's not improved. And again, we have a few yellows up there. We saw a nice improvement from 23.6% down to 22%. So we're moving in the right direction. Improved DFWs means what? Improved retention, which means more graduations. So I am predicting, going forward, that the improvements we have already made in retention and the cohorts that have already passed through are going to result in graduation rates above 40%. Wouldn't it be nice to have a 40% graduation rate celebration party, Kate?
Oh, I'm in.
A big one. That takes all 3 rooms in all 480 faculty members. Okay? Because that's what we need to do. We need to celebrate and get our success. Success begets success. And so I'm hoping we'll see that in the very near future. But we also have to remember that our administrators, are any of them here? Did they all leave me? Oh, there's one.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking for a dozen. Right? Okay, I'm trying to get everybody's attention because these people need their support. Okay, so let me go back again now. So if we want to get to the, here we go. If we want to get to that 80%, we got to help you guys get that retention up to 50 and get the DFWs further down. And if you need help, you need to ask for it. Yes. Yeah.
I'd like to know how we compare with our peer institutions in the rate of adjunct faculty teaching English courses.
I don't have a clue.
And
I don't think it's the number of adjuncts that are probably the issue. I think it is probably the turnover of adjuncts that are the issue. And I'm not sure that you and I are going to get that data. Pardon?
Do you mind repeating the question when we answer it?
Number of adjuncts. I don't know the number of adjuncts. I know a high percentage are. I know that Kate's been quite concerned about more adjunct turnover as a result of the healthcare issues that are going on. It's affecting people because what's happening, we're seeing the university cutting back the number of hours, which means adjuncts can't work those hours.
And that
They're not getting the benefits.
cost of living raises.
Right. Yeah.
So this-
And that's a university issue. And I think they have to address that. Because if the goal is to get DFWs down and get retention up, we've got to have committed people in the classroom. Engagement is not just engagement of students. It's engagement of the faculty. Yeah.
Question, this is something I brought up probably 10 years ago at our Gateway meetings back then. DFW rates, this hasn't happened too much to me in the last year, but I always have those F-Ns never attended. And I think it's really unfair when they're included in the DFW rates. And I had asked our previous administration if they would please remove those, because you reach out to a student if they've never come to email, and that should not be in your DFW.
Right, and we've looked at that data. I've done it both ways. It's not enough to make a difference in the big picture.
Yeah, but it is as an individual.
Oh, sure. And
well, for my annual review, they report with your DFW.
sure, and that data is available.
Yeah.
Okay, because we do provide it. I just don't want to provide 5 different sets of data that give you the same number in a different
I
format.
just want to know how our local folks in the schools can get that, because I keep saying, whoa, that's not what I calculated, so I can get that.
Yeah, we have it on a separate report. I just summarize these big stacks of reports, otherwise
Sure, yeah.
you'd be trying to sort through them,
If
okay?
you want that, I can get that for you. That'd be
Yeah.
great.
And in fact, these administrative withdrawals have been quite helpful, because what they've actually done in about half the cases, it forces the student to come back to the instructor and actually get back in the class. So it's actually turned out to be a better tool for keeping students than necessarily getting rid of students.
So is flags, I think. That is how getting students on the on-demand.
Yes.
Do these numbers take into account the students who transfer?
The transfer students are kind of interesting, because what happens with transfer students is if somebody starts out at IUPUI and they finish in Bloomington, IUPUI gets the retention and the graduation. If a student starts in Bloomington and finishes here, okay, Bloomington actually gets the retention and they get the graduation. It turns out on a net basis, we actually get about twice as many coming to us as leaving us.
Even just
Which
moving
means
to
that we lose
overall.
that.
Overall, within the IU system, that's the only place it's reported. And I can do an analysis on that, but it's not a huge number, and it doesn't really affect our numbers very much.
The reason I ask is because when, during Summer Success Academy, we were asking our students how many of you plan to stay here or transfer. A surprising number. They're thinking about transferring at some point.
Yeah, and if they transfer, if they start here,
Yeah.
we end up getting the graduation. Graduation is a result in terms of the measurement of where they started. The actual graduation ends up where they ended up. It's on a net basis about 150 students a year. Okay, for IUPUI. Yeah.
Quick question, graduation rates, are those 4-year or 6-year?
So they're 6-year, 150, they're actually the 150%. So there are a few of the associate degrees in there. Okay, that's the way the official numbers calculate. It's not very much. It's essentially a 6-year graduation rate for us. Okay, 4-year graduation rate is pretty dismal. An 8-year graduation rate, which they now calculate, doesn't add a whole lot to the number. So the 6 years are pretty good number. Okay, questions? Yes.
I think somebody asked, how do we compare with Bloomington? Similar?
Oh no, Bloomington is much better. Yeah. If you want, I mean, again, the reporting is up on their university website. You can go ahead and pull the reports. But Bloomington is not a good comparison for us because it's a very different university. But their graduation rates and retention rates are quite a bit higher. Okay. Okay. Last point I'd like to make is that this is a long, arduous, persistent, and patient effort to get this done. And I use a quote from Tinto on the side, and if you tilt your head, you can probably read it. But they point out that this is a long journey. This doesn't happen overnight, and we've got to continue to persist in ourselves to make this happen. The other thing he talks about is the importance of alignment. alignment across all of the schools, all of the majors, all of the things going on in the university to focus on how do we get this done. How do we together get this done? What do we need to do together to get this done? It's not something you edict. It's something that happens because each and every one of you that are in the room, or each and every one of those that should have been in the room today, to make it happen. It's one student at a time. Okay? Yes?
I'm curious about the graduation rate. I know that the state has implemented a 3-year degree to provide to push people through, and they're pushing for more 4-year graduations. But it seems like that you're just happy to get a 6-year graduation.
No, I'm not happy about a 6-year grad. All I'm doing is, no, 6-year tends to be the benchmark for which most universities are measured. Okay, that's the only reason we use it. And it's a good benchmark. 6 years, the national 6-year rate is 54%. Okay? There are 4-year rates if you want it. And there are 2-year rates for if you want to look at those as well. But
So is the push to try to get more of the 4-year rates?
well, I think what we'd like to do is get more students graduating within the 6 years.
I see.
Okay? Yeah.
Is that a measurement related with the amount of financial aid available to students? Is that how that number came up?
I'm sure there's somebody who's correlated with something. I mean, there's a million reports out there that somehow people correlate something with everything else. I don't know. I mean, because financial aid has also changed along the way here. So I wouldn't want to judge that. I think U.S. News and World Report and the Washington Monthly try to do that in their expected graduation.
They include the Pell Grants.
Huh?
They include Pell Grants.
Yeah, they try to. And they also include tuition levels and so on.
Now, the one thing that you should be aware of is the state of Indiana is changing its funding mechanisms for students, so that in order to get full financial aid from the state of Indiana, you'll need to be taking 30 credits per year. This could have a huge impact on our students because we know that our students take between 12 and 14 credits. So, we're going to need to shift our students to the 15, or we're going to need to advise them to, if they can't, to do 12, 12, and 6. Because what's going to happen after next year is the following year, if they don't have that 30 credit hours, like more traditional Bloomington type campuses, their scholarship money is going to be prorated by the amount of credit hours that they took the prior year. So for our students, this is a really bad turn of events.
Yeah,
Because our students work.
yeah, I'm working on a pipeline study, okay? Because we can compress the pipeline. Some universities, what they have done is they're looking at those students who are taking 6.5 years to figure out how to get it from 6.5 to less than 6, or 4.5 to 4. So there is efforts going on to try to figure out how do we reduce the time as well. We haven't put a lot of effort into that. But there is a pipeline that says what happens if we teach more summer classes? What happens if we do things that would help students to get more hours in more quickly? But I haven't attempted to do that for this purpose today.
I want to thank him for